Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the year-end special for Delhala. Now, my brother and I were talking recently. It's deer season up here, and we were looking at some deer video on trail cams. And one day I just went through YouTube just to see what was available out there, and I was a little bit disappointed. It's sort of like YouTube is rife with booty shake videos, and I don't think we need another booty shake video anymore than we need any more explanation of the Colt Single Action Army, unless you're going to actually go into some substantial detail on model to year to development, that kind of thing. And when we're looking at trail cameras, a lot of it was just guys, hunters, either giving their opinion or trying to be scientists. And it's obvious they're not scientists. And the type of videos I was running into were, okay, one example were people that had a box of trail cams they've used over the past 10 years. And I'm happy that they've been using trail cams for 10 years. But you can't, the video trying to show which ones are good and which ones are bad out of that bunch are useless to me. Because true, the Chevy 2 1962 model had a specific 0 to 60 and fuel mileage and all that other stuff. But I can't buy a 1962 Chevy 2 original because they don't sell them anymore. So that's pretty well much any kind of comparison using obsolete electronics, and it gets obsolete fast, very fast. So even if you do one that's a year-old video and you've been playing in the woods for a year old, there are firmware updates, there's all kind of stuff that goes on, and they're pretty well much dead before they're ever shot. Okay, and then we have the car salesman type ones where, quite honest, I use a car salesman, not dissing on car salesmen, but if you want to know how a car works, what is better, talking to either the engineers who designed and built it, which is generally not available, or to the mechanics who actually work on the puppies, versus talking to a salesman who we're going to probably steer you to the inventory they have on hand. Not dissing them, but a lot of times you'll hear a lot of stuff that is just personal opinion of what the engineers who designed it actually did. And we can't make assumptions, bold assumptions from one to the other that something absolutely is this or everybody's doing that. Same thing with people who buy a bunch of cameras, even if they bought them in the current year and try to test them. You know, the cheapest camera on the internet, the best camera on the internet, the best camera for $30 or $40, the best cheap camera with $200 even, because they're not testing every single one. And again, they're just enthusiasts like a lot of us are. Well, my background is actually engineering. I'm an engineer first and a hunter second. In fact, let me switch backgrounds, give you a little image of that so you know that I have actually been in the woods at some point in my life. Well, there we have some things in the background. And again, I'm not digging on anybody, but I'm just saying this video is going to be like none other on the internet that I have seen. All right. So we're getting ready to go to the intro, and when we get back, we'll talk about, if we have all the time in the world, we'll talk about panels, solar panels, cameras. You see that one right there? It's not necessarily the best or whatever, but it's one I like. Mounts and some things, and we'll relate it to some of the science to start out with, even securing some stuff to the tree against theft. So if you're interested, hang around. Let's hit the introduction for this show. Okay, we're back in the woods, and now what I want to do is I want to start from really a little bit of the science, because I want to talk about the stuff that's being said about low glow and no glow, and I'm be careful about those. I don't know if those terms are like owned by someone, so I might change the terminology somewhat. So we're going to talk about it more in terms of wavelength and light first, and then how it's really not. If you're doing whitetail deer, if you're scouting for whitetail deer, it's really not. There's really nothing. There's no there. It's a big nothing burger, to quote Hillary Clinton. All right. So are you ready? Let's go ahead and kick over to the other panel, and then I've just done a Google light spectrum in nanometer, and I picked up a picture because it'll work for us. All right. Now we know that light is just electromagnetic waves, and it's just a frequency of it. And if you want to think about how the eyes are going to work, we're going to talk a little bit about the theory on animals with that and people. The eye is like an antenna, and the actual processing is the brain. That's your radio is your brain, and the eyeball is the actual antennas over the different bands. So the classic human visible spectrum is said to be from a little over 400 nanometers, which is actually a smaller number. It's a shorter wavelength, to 750 or so. Now that's what they say we can see, but not every human is the same. Our eye structures are different, but it's just what the smarty pants in science says the visible spectrum is, and they've defined it, and it's been that way for years. So we have these different colors. Well, let me chase a little rabbit for you real quick. Did you know that magenta really doesn't exist? That color doesn't exist in light. Now it does in pigment, because anybody who's changed an ink cartridge knows that there's a magenta ink that you can buy, and that's a pigment, and that's a blend of different materials that reflect those frequencies of light. But if we were to take this spectrum and bend this corner around down here, and take this one and bend it down and make like a washer, like a color wheel, we have something unique with that. Because if I pick any color on this rainbow right here, and I say that's my color of pure yellow, and then I take my pure yellow, and if I step just a small step off, it's just a slight difference in the wavelength. And if I take it and I step off this way a little bit, it's just a slight change in wavelength. And so we can say that those colors exist because they are continuous. And we can chop that down more and more and more and more till there's always a slightly longer or slightly shorter wavelength. Now what happens with magenta is I'm taking a red, which is a long wave in light, and a very short wave in light, and when there is not a place that I can go closer and closer and closer together and pick one frequency, so that if I step off one side and I step off the other side the same amount, that I have that double that interval between the two. So it doesn't really exist. But that's a little bit of chasing of a rabbit. In ink and pigments, they do exist. So the question is about this low glow. Is it a big deal that we stay away from the low glow cameras because they're all garbage, and we buy the no glows instead because of the wavelength that the infrared diodes are putting out? Well, did you realize that the structure of the eyes, not everything can see everything, and some things can see a little bit more? And by that, we're not necessarily saying, well, they get an image out of it, but they can detect the electromagnetic radiation. The radios can pick up the signal. And owls, for instance, according to Google, scientists believe that they can only see black and white, that they don't see colors. And they talk about this here, that we're going to speak about the rods are for, they're a kind of a broad spectrum, and all they do is tell you whether or not there's something there. That's the grays, the black to the grays. And the cones are the ones that perceive color. And depending on the shape and size of the cones, they theorize what frequencies of light that something can see. And also by the number, the relative population of these things, which colors they can detect. Okay? And so owls are, although they may have some cones, and they are predominantly rods for low level light at night, and they're nocturnal, so that makes good sense. Well, if we look at the average human, they say from 380 to 750. That's that visual spectrum. Look at the same thing. There's another critter out here we're going to look at, which is this Mantis Shrimp, and they say they can perceive energy from 16 different color spectrums. But those little eyes are probably going to be more of a motion detector, kind of the way deer are. Deer are more motion detectors than they are actual photographic type of memory. Now, if we think about, again, the no glow versus the low glow, and people say, well, don't do that because there can be some red. We can see red. When we put our little trail cameras, we can see a little bit of red when they're getting ready to do that flash or actually fire for video. The first thing I want you to remember is if you're really worried about that, just take flash pictures, because it's just a blink and it's gone. If you're taking video and you believe they can see it, that's going to be on for the duration of your video. You can take shorter videos. The question is, can deer really see it? And if you go out on the internet, you'll find a lot of people have a lot of different ideas that have evolved over a period of time. Now, I have brought up to you something I want you to think about. When you look at a low glow trail camera and you see the infrared being triggered, it's actually very, very faint. Even for us as human beings, it's very, very faint, okay? And when are you going to have that being fired? Only at night. And you have to almost be directly in front of the LED for you to see that little tiny glow. So how often is that going to happen if you're worried about spooking deer? Okay? Because you're only going to be taking those pictures at night, and during the daytime, it's not going to be firing the infrared LEDs. And you can see, humans can see, if you're worried about somebody stealing it, seeing the flash, is going to be fairly low distance away from the camera anyway. And that's where we get into the fact that we have straps, or we do a different type of mount like this. So it kind of doesn't really make a lot of sense when we talk about getting all that bent out of shape over a low glow versus the no glow. Because the other issue is, can they actually see it? When does it fire? And are you more likely to be detected by having your camera strapped to a tree at eye level or something like that, as opposed to that little flash that really doesn't have that far of a projection out into the woods anyway, and even then it's directionally on the one side of the tree or fence post or whatever you have. So even a human is not likely to see it, because it comes on mainly at the dark. And we humans don't see very well at the dark, but we see better at the daytime, and you're much more likely, regardless of low glow or no glow, for you to see a trail cam stuck on the side of a tree. Is that making sense to you? So already, if they're trying to upsell you to a, quote, no flash or black flash, does it really matter? Will it spook deer? That's the other question. Now, we can use, if we want to go non-visible to us, on a trail camera like this, we can either use infrared or ultraviolet. All right, I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Now, this is an inspector flashlight, an old one, and it will blind the camera. But if I turn it on, right here, you see what color is that? That is the short wave. All right, see, it's got a little bit of color to it. The camera detects it. It, to me, appears to be a little bit of a faint yellow. Now, if I turn it to the other frequency, which is more of a purpley color, a longer wave, I can see a little bit better. It looks a little bit more blue. If I turn a white light on, well, it's just white light, and it flashes, blinds it out. The lumens it puts out are still fairly high in each of those colors, but their frequencies are invisible to us. So you might say, well, why can I see it in that LED just like I can see on a low glow trail camera? It's because those LED emitters are not lasers. Okay, let's go back to our light spectrum up here, and I'll turn it on, switch back. Okay, now we're back to our spectrum. Now here's our spectrum. We're working in this area. We could make it work with ultraviolet, but they have some hazards associated with UV. If we just got finished with the year of the Rona, we know scientifically that a mask will not stop a 124 nanometer virus from being inhaled. But we know that UVC that we put in our filters in our air conditioners after they've gone through a HEPA filter will kill the virus. So UV is not a healthy, non-visible spectrum to go into, so we use the infrared. Okay? Is that making any sense? So we're going to be down on this side of it. The question is, what can animals see, specifically our white-tailed deer that we're interested in? Well, I found a scientific article that does, I think, a better job of explaining the reality of it. Yes, perhaps we can debate whether or not white-tailed deer can see red. The general consensus among the scientists over the period of years through their study is that deer cannot see red. Doesn't mean they can't see the light. It just means that their cones are not able to differentiate perhaps the difference between the red and the green, which basically means yellow. So they see from blue to yellow, which would be here on this chart. It's going to be from somewhere up in this area all the way down to about here, and then it starts to get dimmer and dimmer. It doesn't mean they're not perceiving that there's colors existing. It's just they can't really tell what they are, and they're thought to drop off around 650 nanometers, so that they drop off somewhere around this little orange, and most of it will say they can't really see the red. They may see the intensity of it, but daylight, we're getting so much more radiation from the sun during the day to stimulate those cones. Whether or not they can physically tell the difference between a red and a green is kind of a moot point. But most of our outdoor writers don't seem to understand that. They want to tell us that they just can't see red. Well, if they can't see red, they're not going to see a little bit of a splash coming into our visible spectrum. The reason we saw the slight blue and yellows on those LEDs of this flashlight were because it's not a laser. It's not a single frequency. It's an entire spectrum, and the intensity, the lumens, if you want to think about it, being put off at those other frequencies other than, say, the 850 nanometers, they're spreading out like this, and they get down and maybe way down in that bottom corner, there's enough of the higher frequencies up in this area around the 700 that we can see it. Doesn't mean it gets far enough up here for the deer to see it. And that also brings up this little point right here. This is a magazine. It is actually from the Digital Commons, so I think we have rights to read from it. This is a little older publication, but I want to find this if I can find it. Operant conditions techniques employed in pen studies using trained cervids, that would be deer, confirm that short wavelength sensitive cone mechanisms, a middle wavelength cone mechanism, and that may be in that thought process where they say they can actually see red-green, but they're colorblind to red-green, that they can see blue and they can see that red-green and it perceives it as yellow, and a short wavelength sensitive rod pigment. That is your nighttime vision. The number and distributions of rods and cones in the retina, augmented by adaptations in the eye, give white-tailed deer high visual sensitivity and acuity in light and darkness. Because we know our eyes have a UV filter. It actually cuts off and protects our retina from those dangerous UV light spectrum. That's why we don't stare at the sun, because it's not foolproof, but it filters it down pretty good. Deer don't have a UV filter in their eyes. Now let's notice this. During the day, deer discriminate colors in the blue to yellow-green and can also distinguish longer orange and red wavelengths. At night, deer see color in the blue to blue-green range, although the moderately wide spectral sensitivity of the rods permits some discrimination of longer wavelengths. Now let's look at this spectrum again. So if they're saying they see the blue to yellow-green, that's in this area, so they're saying they see somewhere around 600 if they go all the way into yellow from the blue, so they're going, say, 450 into, say, 600, but at night they still see a little bit of color, but it's really not much is what they're saying. They're saying it's blue to blue-green. So we're choking down maybe 525 or something like that. So we're still seeing in this range right here. This is totally cropping off, looks like, the red levels where our little bit of bleed might be coming over from our infrared low-glow sensors. And so at that point, pretty well much shoots the argument that no glow is great and low glow LEDs are garbage. So you take from that what you want. But I tell you, they don't seem to be able to see the low glow any more than they see the no glows. But somebody is selling cameras based upon that. Now there is another little feature I want to talk about momentarily. We get back to the effect of those LEDs. Here in this camera, we see the LED array. Now, as a general rule, not having designed any camera, I'm told that when you select from a parts bin an LED, which is designed to have its center frequency at the 850 nanometers, which is outside our visible spectrum, we do get that tail off. But if we take that same tail off and we shift it down so that we hit that 940 center frequency so that we don't get any little tiny fragments in our visible red spectrum, that the LEDs that they do that with, that per milliamp, that the amount of drive that we have to hit that LED to generate the same amount of lumens in that non-visible spectrum at that lower wavelength, that slower, longer wavelength, that there's only about 65%. So, if you have a camera that is designed for no glow, you may actually have a little higher current drain. You'd have to check with the manufacturer to find out if it's true. But I've talked to some people in the actual manufacturing industry, and they say yes. We actually have to drive those 940 nanometer or whatever they are, the no glow light LEDs, harder with more current than we do the low glow. So if you're having trouble with battery drain and you're concerned about having battery drain, one way to do that is shoot shorter videos, because it's the video that turns that light on and keeps it on for a certain number of seconds, right? Or kind of go to the flash. Go so you're just taking still pictures and you're saving a lot of energy in your batteries, regardless of whether or not they're no glow or low glow. Does that make sense to you? So I think that's probably a fair assessment to make. The other thing I want to talk about in regard to that is, well, how can you deal with that reality if you're dealing with that? Well, what about your car? We know in cold weather, in very cold weather, our cold cranking amps on our batteries, our car batteries, a completely different technology. It's a wet acid battery, but we know that the colder an environment is, the less power there is in a battery that it can put out, because the impedance in that battery increases when it gets cold and it drops when it gets hot. That's why if you've got your clicker and it doesn't work, and you can't change the channel, if you pull that little back off and you roll those batteries back and forth like that, one, you're knocking the oxidation off of that 1.5 volt cell, maybe 1.25 volt cell, but you can rub them, warm them up, put the back on, and generally get a few more clicks at it before you have to get up and go change the batteries. It's because it's temperature related. So when you look at people giving you a battery life report and they live, say, in Florida or lower Alabama versus somebody who lives up in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, you may get some very different opinions, and they're valid because it's what they saw. Well, one way to get around that is to use a solar panel. Well, how do you size a solar panel? Well, most of these solar panels are rated either by watts or by milliampere hours. And what a milliampere hour is how many milliamps can it put out for an hour before the battery is totally depleted. Well, there's something else that goes on when you look at the cameras. We know that the Earth is like this. If in summer and we got the equator and the sun is hitting it, when we tilt the Earth back for winter in the northern hemisphere, our daylight gets shorter and shorter. It typically, because we're having less radiation, our nights get colder, which affects our battery, and our recharge time on any kind of a solar panel is going to get worse. What does it also do as far as your lights and shadows? Well, I like to take my cameras and face them north, because in my earth, when I rotate my earth this way for wintertime, and even summer it's still going to be this way, but my sun is going east to west. It rises in the east and goes down in the west. So it puts the sun at my back just like I would do a deer stand. I want my deer stand facing north because that puts the sun, the morning sun comes up in the deer's eyes, not mine. Well, that means I would take my solar panel and put it on the southward facing part of a tree, so it gets the most sun during those cold winter months. It also keeps the sun from going in my lens of my camera. And that means it has to be on the other side of the tree. So I personally would never buy a camera that has a solar panel on it that's on the camera. They're on the same side, because either I get sun to charge it, or I get the sun in my camera, or I get the sun out of my camera and I don't charge my batteries as much. So that's something. Now again, you might be able to change your video length down. Now this particular camera, this one will let me turn the camera off at night. So if I'm really having trouble keeping my battery up in my camera, in however configuration I have it set up, my software in this particular camera will let me turn that off, so that I'm not burning the LED array. Because that's when I'm depleting the battery for the most part, is when I'm firing those LEDs over 10 seconds or 20 seconds or 30 seconds or longer. When I'm firing those heavy LEDs to make that infrared light, that's when I drain the battery down. Now, some cheaper cameras may actually have fewer LEDs, and they may have less battery drain. So what I can get out of this one, who says I go 50 or 80 feet, okay, with that light, I may not be able to maintain it without having a solar panel. And I'll put some videos up here as I'm talking. I'll give you some examples. And I think this particular camera has a pretty good reach. The other feature, regardless of brand, are these little side detectors. Now these are not in, when these trigger, they're not in the field of view. How I have used this camera in the past is I set it up on my ridge. You see it behind me a little bit. I have a ridge that kind of goes north and south, and the deer like to go along that ridge off the top of it. Sometimes they cross over, but they like to go travel down along a certain ledge, because I have what we call paralithic rock, where I have the little rocky outcrops come across, and they like to stay above that or below that. And because it's coming off at the same elevation of the ridge, it makes a little shelf, and they like to stay on top or the bottom of it. Well, it sits where it is, and you can see the shadows behind me. You can see how the sun is. They're actually casting the shadows up the hill. See that one right there? It's actually casting the shadow up the hill. So I have, in this location, I actually have the photo cell, the charger, facing the south, and I have the camera kind of facing down that ridge. And so it gives me a travel quarter, and I don't want the two sides to work, because I found I'm getting a lot of parallel travel anyway, and where I have these guys tripping, they're picking up movement that's outside of my field of vision that are coming in at any kind of little angle, and I'm getting a lot of blank pictures. There's something triggered it. So I actually have within this camera the ability to turn these off. Now, when would I want to turn these on? Well, for me, I have moved this camera, the one that's in that woods, in closer to a salt hole, because I'm not doing reconnaissance over a big area. I'm actually moving it down the hill so I can kind of watch the cross traffic. And in that case, I do want them to trigger, because the closer I am to what I'm trying to photograph, if I want a bigger, more detailed photograph, I have to get closer and closer. That gives me a little less trigger time. Well, not really trigger time, is not really the word. The delay time is better if you get, say, 5 seconds. And the way that works is, put my camera back up, if these guys are seeing motion on the side, if I have a 5-second delay, when it picks up 5 seconds as the deer enters this little projection, if at the end of 5 seconds it's still seeing movement, it then turns on either the photo or the video. So if I'm close, I might want to turn those on if the deer are walking crossways to me. If they're walking kind of underneath it, kind of this way, I turn them off because I don't want the false triggers. Does that make sense? In the software, the camera needs to be able to do that, but I'm not hearing a lot of information on the configuration within the camera itself. People are just going, well, the pictures are good or the pictures are bad. Have you ever seen a trail camera where, like me, I'm all ghosted out at night? I'm all whited out. You can't see. You just see the silhouette is black behind me and I'm all white. Well, that may be that the array, that the LED array, is not being dimmed back down, that the camera may not be doing exposure adjustment as it goes. And it also may be too close. That doesn't mean the camera's bad. Maybe all I just need to do is take that camera and move it a little bit further away so that my intensity of my light, my infrared light, is a little dimmer, and oftentimes I'll pick up the detail because I'm not ghosted out if my camera can't do it for me. And the same thing at a distance. If I get too far off and I don't have enough lumens coming out of the camera up here, I may not be able to make out what I got in a distance, and that gets sorted to the megapixel issue. I have confirmed with this manufacturer that although it says it's 32 megapixels, they're not 32 megapixel native on the CIS, or the CMOS image sensor. They are upscaling, they're doing interpolation, and actually the pictures are pretty good at night and day for a good distance out. Now what happens if my deer are crossing 35 yards out in front of me? When they're picking up at night, my natural instinct is to want to zoom in on the deer to see what it is, and they're a little blurry, they're a little dotty, but it's still very good for how much money I'm paying for this camera, which is about $100. Now you see a little antenna on top of this. I like this one because it allows me to actually read the camera, set the camera for the most part, and not actually have to touch it. But it sucks the battery down because it's doing a Bluetooth first. It works off of a cell phone, and if I get the signal, it does a Bluetooth first. It seems to be just kind of open hardware to hardware. It's its own app to its own little camera, and you have to be fairly close for that. So once it gets that initial connection, it then brings in Wi-Fi, and people get upset online. I say, well, that's not really Wi-Fi, I can't hook it to my network. That's not what they're doing. What they're using is because the data stream rate, the bit rate on most of the old Bluetooth is not all that high. And so if you're going to try to pull a 40 megabyte video down to view it, it would take flipping forever. So they use the Bluetooth long enough to negotiate a secure transaction between the camera and your device, in this case a cell phone, and then it can use that higher bit rate, that higher megabit rate on the camera to the cell phone. Now what I found here during the winter is the specs say that you can get about 55 feet from it. Okay, and that may be true in the summer. I don't normally sit in a tree stand in the summer, but I have been able to sit in the tree stand, nothing happening, get a Bluetooth connection, probably about 75 yards, 50 to 75 yards, get a weekend up. If I can get the connection started and kick it over to Wi-Fi, I'm actually able to go through and look at some of the video. Well, I'm interrupting myself, partially because I want to make a point, but also to keep you interested, because it does take a while to explain this stuff. Now, these panels, I want you to think of these panels not as a battery replacement, but more as a battery saver. Now, this one is a larger one because I started out with some smaller ones, about the size of a cell phone, okay? And here's the box they come in, and they're about that big. So they're nice. They were cheap, only about 40 bucks. But one of the things that they would do is, being a lot smaller, they're easier to mount on the tree. And that's fine. But they say they're about 5,200 milliampere hours. That's the capacity of how much they hold. The thing is, I'm not sure I completely buy that, but they do extend the life of the batteries that are in the camera itself. So I'm trying a new one, a bigger one, on this third camera. And this has supposedly 8,000 milliampere hours. It's a little bit bigger. It's a little heavy, quite a bit heavier. But I want to point out something. If you look at the mount, I have got this set so that when it goes into the tree, I have one low corner so that the water then runs across, runs down, and wants to drip off that edge. Here's the 12 volt that I'm going to be using is on this side. And I don't really want my water to collect on the low corner if that's where I'm going to have my power cable plugged in, because this is sort of a weak spot once it's the rubber is unplugged on it and it's letting the water kind of get to that, kind of maybe oxidize a little bit. So I want to hang it a little bit at an angle, see, like that, to kind of drip off on that. You may not want to do that, but I think I'm going to do that. Now, also, the difference between the two types of panels were the one that's about the size of a cell phone. It has red lights on it that never go away. Now, you always can see them. Now, you can tape over them, but as soon as you can tape over them, the problem is, with like black tape so they don't show, it gets back to the issue of, can deer see red at night? If it's daytime, they're so faint it's hard to see unless you're standing right up underneath there and kind of looking for the status lights. These lights on this one go out. They will show you if you push the button. They'll tell you how much it's charging. See that, but they go out. The other thing I noticed is I don't hear any noise out of this unit. The little one that was about this size, I've got two of those out there, they do make a little bit of a real high-pitched squeal that I can hear when I'm right next to the unit. Like if I'm up the tree and I'm strapped in, I can kind of hear it oscillating a little bit. Doesn't seem to affect the deer. I have seen a few deer, when they get right up real close, they kind of look up and then they keep walking, because it's just maybe something a little bit new to them that they haven't heard. The other thing is, when you look at these things, you want to look at what they're rated for, their power. Now, this one says it's a, I think it says it is a 3-watt unit versus, I think that the little ones were a 1.5 watt. And so that's going to basically kind of give you an idea. It's going to be a little bit bigger, a little bit more robust. And in those cold winter months, you get a trade-off. In the summer, we have a lot more foliage, and you're probably going to hit shadows on it, and it may not charge as well. But that's kind of offset by the fact in winter, when you have more sunlight, you also have shorter days. So in the summer, the idea is hopefully we'll get enough charge during the longer days, even though we might have a little bit of some shadows or something come across it. So that's something to think about. If you're in a bad shape with like that one I relocated and moved, that ash tree is throwing a shadow on it and it's not wanting to charge as much. Now, that's not a disaster in the standpoint that if it were to deplete using, firing the diode array, it's still going to drop over to the batteries inside of the unit. So it's just kind of how that works there. The ratings on them, when I call or actually emailed the people at the camera place and said, what is your current, what is your standby current, what is your worst case current, it's only running about 100 milliamps. Now, a AA battery, an alkaline AA battery, at its peak current will run about 50 milliamps. through it. So it is going to tax them a little bit with the video when you're firing that array, but realize you're not firing that array very long at all, because you're only doing it like a couple of seconds at a shot for the videos. On the flash, it's just there and it's gone, so it's not really a problem. But it drains that battery. So I use a form of photovoltaic cell that's got battery in it. So it runs at night so it doesn't run the battery down. Now, if this were to run down, it just switches over to the batteries in the camera itself. So again, it's just convenient because I actually have some camera off the side of the hill, and if I come up along a trail and I ride toward the top, I can get not right on top of my hunting area where I have to go down there and like swap out a card. I don't swap out a card. I can drive up there on the four-wheeler and then get a connection close enough to this, to the various cameras, and pull them up one by one and review them. Now I may have to actually drive down the property a ways to get close enough to another camera, but I can do that, and they've been holding pretty well. Now I did have a problem here recently when I moved a camera that was shooting along the trail to a different location down the trail, and first I couldn't get it to trigger right. And I'm not using, even then I'm not using these two guys here, I'm just using that center passive infrared guy right there. And I found out I had a little cedar tree that was 10, 15 feet in front of it, but it was blocking enough of that initial center vision that it just wasn't triggering right. And I moved it up the tree and down the tree and tilted and all that kind of stuff, and I still couldn't get it to trigger. So I ended up cutting the tree up right below the camera, and I got the beautiful range of motion, and it reaches out there pretty good. You'd be surprised. I'll show you another video with this camera at a distance, and you can get an idea just how far it triggers, because it actually triggers far enough to see a buck coming out of the woods when it looks like there's almost no infrared light getting that far, and I'll show you that little video in just a second. So I'm pretty happy with this camera. Does it do everything? No, it's a little bit of a booger when I do the motion detect, because the motion detect has to be manually programmed on the back of the device. So if I have to open it up, and then on the inside of it I have to put it in the detection mode, okay, and then I have to manually switch it back out, and I have to be up the tree to do that. But I personally prefer being up the tree, not necessarily because I'm afraid somebody's going to see it and steal it, but I just like to have more of an up view kind of down in my little spread area that I'm watching. And in the case where I actually moved down a hill, so to speak, I actually have to go up the tree to kind of shoot straight across. So you need to look, I think you need to spend a little bit more time looking at the details of how the camera is to work, and a little less about just picking on, well, I don't like, the pictures aren't perfectly clear. If you're looking for recce, if you're looking for information on whether or not there's a big boy floating around in your woods, I like a fairly strong infrared, which eats batteries, and I want to get out there, and I don't want to necessarily be sitting on top of him when I take my pictures. And I also would like not to go down there stinking up my grass, my leaves, and whatever I got on there. And this one being a radio type, a Wi-Fi type, I can actually use it on my cell phone and look at the images and not actually have to touch it. And that allows me to go up there during deer season and not contaminate my woods. But you will need one of these. Now, this is a little different. This is a bigger, stronger than the previous two that I've got out there, and it works. I think will work pretty good. The other ones worked well until I moved that one camera here, and I got a little bit of a shadow from a big elm tree, big ash tree, and the ash tree through the day comes over and it puts a shadow on the charger, and it actually got it down one time, and it's really having a hard time getting back up to full charge. And I need to go up, I need to go back to that and cut my 30-second videos down to 10. Because I'm not going to fill up my card with a quarter terabyte SD card in it. So that's some of the stuff that I'm looking at. I am real hesitant to trash cameras and say that they're absolutely no good. I think they're good for different things. I think before we worry too terribly much about low glow versus no glow, I think we need to understand that in night vision mode, deer are like us. They can still see some stuff in black and white, certainly better than we can. But the research would seem to suggest that in night vision mode, they have even a more narrow range of frequencies that they can see. And if it's during the daytime, it's not going to fire those LEDs anyway. And if you add to that, nobody is going to miss a camera bolted to the side of the tree if they're facing it. But by putting it on the south facing north, anybody who walks through my woods are going to get the sun in their eyes just like the deer do. So I've seen people pick on the camouflage colors of it. It's like, if you're looking for it, you can find one. I mean, that's just a bottom line. If you're looking for a camera, you can find one in there. So another issue, the two final pieces of wisdom that I would offer you are this. Your camera, the only way you're actually going to know how it performs for you is for you to buy the camera and install the camera. Nobody's opinion on the internet matters a hoot and a holler, because it's not your world. The only person who's going to know if it works for you is you, and you got to buy it to see if it works. You got to pass the bill to see what's in the bill. Okay, it's just that simple. And the other thing is, how much you want to spend on a camera is directly proportional to whether or not you would be willing to take a $50 bill or a $100 bill and thumbtack it to a tree. Because if you're worried about somebody stealing it, you're not going to enjoy that camera anyway. Now, we didn't talk about mounts yet, but I do have two mounts, and I do want to get to them because I'm trying to wrap up. This is the one, and a lot of them come with a mount that looks something similar to this, right? I hold it up a little bit closer. This one is a little more deluxe because it's got the little thumb screws on here versus one that you have to use a hex key with. And here's one that I made up, and this is what the cameras are sitting on. I don't know if you can see that. This right here is just what I call a furniture bolt. It's a lag screw on one side and a 1/4-20 on this side. This is actually half of a rod of an all-thread connector, because I want something I can get my hands back there and work a wrench without banging the camera or whatever. And this is 3rd generation, so there is a jam nut. The 1st generation had a full rod connector, and it was red lock tighted down, and it held. When I cut them down to get them a little closer to the tree so I wouldn't silhouette as much, I had one of them back off, and it stuck in the tree, and I have to use a jam nut on that. But this is just like a $2 ball mount for a camera, and it allows me to put that up in that position or tilt it. And when I'm up in the tree, if I'm trying to aim it down a little bit more, I can do that. That's also something I didn't mention. When you're aiming the camera, because I can see the live video on my phone, it really helps me aiming the camera to get to see what I'm trying to see. If I'm trying to fit 2 rubs on the opposite side of that travel corridor and I want to get one in and out, it allows you to take it and tilt that camera just a little bit. It really helps you find what you've got. So that's a very handy feature, I think. So it's a pretty good camera. I like it so far. It's not flawless. The video, I've put some video in here. I might have some more overlaying depending on how much I jibber jabber. I might give you some more video of it, but it does a pretty good job. And it does what I need it to do, which is to tell me if there's somebody walking around, and I don't want to have a blue zillion windblown photographs. Okay, and you just have to learn that equipment. And like I say, it doesn't do you any good, in my opinion, to look at a 1962 Chevy S2 or Chevy 2, because they're not making those anymore. And if you're not real careful when you talk about specific models, by the time you test it and then give you a report, it's already outdated. Or like this one, I can actually update the firmware if we're having too much troubles and they're getting too many complaints. They can make some adjustment in their software. Other things, I can turn the camera off so it doesn't work at night. I can turn the side one's off, so I'm just using the center. It has a lot of capability in the settings, and the menus are fairly easy to use. And for the most part, I can sit at the bottom at the four-wheeler, okay, and then take my phone, log into it, so to speak, connect to it, and then adjust my settings in the season and never actually have to touch the camera again, as long as I keep the battery charged. And if I got one of these dudes working, it's fine. The first two of these I used are smaller, they're lower wattage. I called the manufacturer and asked them what the peak drain was, and they said it's this one will do, I think, 1.5 amps at 12 volts. So it's more than what I need. So if it doesn't get charged because I've got a shadow of a tree or something on it, I should still be able to pull winter through without having to climb up the tree and change my alkaline batteries. Because once they get down, they're just kind of a booger to climb back up there and get them. So anyway, what was the last thing I was going to talk about? Because I got my props here. These are the two things I use to secure it. Just a little chain. It's like a Cobra lock, and I like this because it's smaller. Yes, they can cut it before they can cut like a whatever 3/16 cable that the Cobra locks have in them, but also a little thing here to keep them from stealing my card. But I also don't need but one card per camera because I'm not changing them out, unless maybe I wait till next spring and I haven't done it 6 months, and I might climb up there and swap cards at that point. But this says it's a Propel. I can read it on a monitor over here. It's Propel. It's for kayaks and whatnot. And it's a 6-foot length. And the diameter of that cable will actually fit on this particular camera that I use. Let me see if I can get it up here. You see that little hole? See my little eyeball through there? All right, I can actually get 2 passes of this little cable through that hole and still get around the tree. And I think it's hides it a little bit better than a heavier cable that's, the bend radius, the natural bend radius under the sag is a little bit hanging out there or whatever. I think it hides the camera just a little bit better. But ultimately, if it's daytime, people are going to see it. I do like a mount something like this simply because I can screw it in the tree, get it fairly close to the tree. They don't see that big strap. They may see that little black cable running through it, but I loop it a couple times. And of course, they're going to see this charger on the back side of the tree anyway. And the bigger that this guy is, and this is quite a bit bigger than the first model that I've got a couple of those out there, it's going to stick out from the tree. So you're really not going to hide it from anybody looking to find it. But I think that the no glow and low glow is a lot of marketing nonsense for the most part. And if you're concerned about the price of your unit, you can probably find a low glow camera cheaper, because now people have it stuck in their heads that they're not as good when they actually seem to use a little bit less battery. So you might actually, if you don't have a solar charger to use, it may actually be a better opportunity for you. So, but anyway, that's it. Appreciate you watching. I do want to hear your comments whether or not you think this was just a waste of your life, or whether or not the approach to this information is a little bit different, because I really don't want to tell you what is best, because that's just my opinion. I'd rather you look at it a little bit more scientifically in terms of when the deer goes in night vision, he doesn't see that much anyway. He sees better than we do, but he still doesn't see that much. And during the daytime, any camera has the same basic level of being spotted as any of the others do. So you'll never find a perfect camouflage to match your tree, I don't think. So yeah, that's it. Appreciate you watching. Have a great Christmas and a happy New Year, and we'll see you on the other side. All right, the last rabbit we're going to chase, when you go to install, I made me a little bag full of extra wood screws and painted my little wrench red for if I drop it, that kind of thing, which you can do. I took a orphan wrench. This is actually 11 millimeter, but it works on the quarter that I use on this thing. Put a little piece of paracord through it, works fine. On your memory cards, what I chose is, it'll go up, it says it'll go up to 0.5 terabyte. It says it'll recognize up to 0.5 terabyte, the particular camera I use. I got 128s because they're pretty cheap and they work all right. As far as the class and all that, you can email the company before you buy a camera, find out what it needs, but I wouldn't spend a lot of money on it. I would prefer using full-size SD cards because I drop things. That's what the string is for, right? Because they drop when you climb. If you're climbing up, if you're on the ground, that's fine. But leaves have a way of swallowing stuff, so that's what I did on that. On your cards, format the card in the camera. And if you happen to get one of these GardePros, first thing you want to do is download the image file from their website, format the card, put it on the card on the computer. Don't try to format this on the computer, it won't read it. So do that first on the camera, then with the camera off, just hold down the menu button, turn it on. It'll go jump down there, look at the root directory, find the image, load the image. After that, it won't read it again unless you try to hold that down. Next time you want to erase all your data on the card, just reformat it from the ground and it's perfectly fine. That's about it. I do wish it was a little bit better. I wish the manufacturers would stop being deceptive in saying that the megapixels are more than what they are. Just tell us what the CIS is actually native for, and if you want to upscale it, you can. Upscaling is not bad, but remember, oh, by the way, you do realize that 1920 by 1080 is actually only 2K. So it's not like you're really going to get a whole lot anyway. And internally for a stream, like when I do live stream with YouTube, you know, they stream out very clean if you have a good source at 1080 when you have a bit rate about 6,000, 6,500. These, when I pull the files off and check them, the computer thinks they're actually been run about 777, something like that, 7,000. So there's going to be a practical limit to streaming anyway. That's one of the reasons you don't really need a very fast card, because it's only going to go about 65, 7,000 on the bit rate. Now, if you go to 1920 or the bigger ones, the 1240s or whatever these things might offer, in most cases, you're going to be limited by that bus speed, that bit rate, and you'll find they'll start cropping off frames. On the unit I have, they'll do 30 frames per second at the finalized version of 1080, but if you go up to the higher, it has to drop that frame rate down to about 20. And I don't know that you're really getting anything a whole lot one way or the other. I can't physically see a whole lot of difference. I do wish the little bar at the bottom was about half as big as what it is, so I could do that so I wouldn't have to block so much off. I don't know why it's quite that big, except they're probably trying to make it, you know, mobile friendly for your cell phone. So anyway, that's about it. Buy what you like. Realize that whatever you leave in the woods, if you're going to get a wireless, you're probably going to end up spending about $200 per camera station by the time you buy a battery replacement, a solar battery. And that's about it. You can always adjust it any way you want to. Reviews online tend to be kind of garbage because you have no idea the terms and conditions and settings that somebody used, and you can burn something up easily in the wood. Your battery's up if you're not doing it smartly. I like to have a little longer video, quite honest, because you know that's what I'm there to watch, right? I'm there to catch the information. So that's about it. I appreciate you watching. Please, if you got all the way to this tail end of this video, like the site that you're on, give it a whirl, and tell your friends, spread it around. It's a little bit different. A lot of people, when they try to be online amateur biologists, I think they forget the simple reality that, like us, if you've been in the woods before daybreak, and as light comes up, you'll notice that you see only black and white during that little time frame. And other animals are very similar. They talk about what they can see, what they can't see. Remember, they're talking about daylight hours. Half the time, they don't even know what they're talking about. They're talking about daylight hours versus nighttime. And you're not going to, and obviously, you got a brick screwed to the side of a tree or strapped to the side of the tree. In daylight hours, they're probably going to see that. As far as the no glow, if you want to, I wouldn't reject the camera just because it was low glow or no glow, that type of thing. I don't think deer can see it. The biology suggests that when they go to their night vision, they lose a lot of their color, not all of their color, but most of it. And what they can see, they're not going to see down in that yellow spectrum and that red spectrum way down on the bottom, tail end between those two, that red yellow. And if they can't see it in the daytime, they're not going to see it really at night. So it's your life, your money, your time. You do what you want to. Appreciate you watching.